Look, if you love to fly your drone, then you've got to know the rules of flying your drone in 2025. And you should be aware of what's coming in 2026, because the whole game is about to change, and getting your Part 107 is going to matter more than ever. So we're going to be talking about the rules of flying recreationally and commercially, right, Rob?
Absolutely, very different animals, and you kind of need to know both to make sure you're on the right track.
At least be able to discern, do I want to spend time with recreational rules or just go right into the commercial business?
Yeah, I would say that the commercial, in spending time preparing for that, is going to behoove you more than you can imagine, because you'll be prepared for those opportunities that are inevitably going to come if you fly your drone very much at all.
At least if you love flying and you love to handle those adventures. So let's break down, what does it mean to fly strictly for recreational purposes?
Well, in very, very strict terms, it means that you are not earning or financially gaining anything from flying your drone. You're not selling any images. You're not volunteering for the local church to give them footage that they are going to use to, and some of this can get a little bit gray.
Super
Frankly,
gray.
Most things can in life, so this is no different. But essentially, to fly recreational, you are flying simply to have a little bit of fun.
Now, even if you are flying and filming for a monetized YouTube channel, you would technically need a Part 107. And while enforcement has been low thus far, it's been increasing over the last few years. The second rule that you should know if you're flying for recreational purposes is that you can fly and follow community-based organization rules. What's interesting about this, though, is that the FAA says no membership fees required, but you'll find that most CBOs are at AMA fields. That being said, a great place to go fly your drone when you're learning is at your local AMA field. You know, there are, certain communities of CBOs as well, the FPV Freedom Coalition, STEM programs, and so much more. We'll just go ahead and link the CBO list down below in the description section. But it's important to know that whether you're flying recreationally or commercially, chances are you have to maintain a visual line of sight.
Well, as a matter of fact, it is absolutely imperative that you understand that it doesn't matter if you're flying recreationally or commercially. You must maintain visual line of sight unless you have gotten a waiver, at least at this point, and what the rules currently stand as, you've gotten a beyond visual line of sight waiver.
Which honestly is going to become so much easier in 2026, but we'll talk about that later. Now, Rob said you've got to maintain visual line of sight of the drone. For commercial purposes, as he just mentioned, you can get a waiver against that, but no waivers if you're flying recreationally. Especially if you're flying FPV and you're wearing goggles, you are supposed to have a visual observer. So whether it's commercial or recreational, when flying FPV, you're supposed to have a VO. Now, our next rule is all about manned aircraft.
Don't get in their way. Always yield to manned aircraft. Period. End of story. There's no exception.
You know, it's interesting because on those CBO rules, we recently went to an AMA field and the guys were like, we land whenever we see a plane. And I'm like, okay, well, that's not what the law says. That's a little bit beyond what we do. We yield to them. We hover in place. We check our app, which I love, Flight Radar 24. Tells you exactly how high the nearest airplanes and helicopters are flying. And typically they're thousands of feet over you, even though they look like they're about to collide.
Absolutely. But you do need to be extra careful if you're anywhere near an airport, a helipad, which you'd be surprised how many helipads are out in our communities.
There are actually quite a lot.
Hospitals, for example, is one place that you're going to find those and not be aware that they're actually there.
And yeah, even here in northern Colorado, there are helicopters that go between Steamboat and Loveland every single day, 4 or 5 times per day. So you should be aware of that. Recreational or commercial, you have to yield to manned aircraft. Now here's where a little bit of bifurcation starts to happen. In our next rule, if you want to fly in controlled airspace, then you've got to get an authorization. And in certain places, hobbyists just can't get an authorization.
That one you're going to have to explain a little bit more, because as far as I'm concerned, anytime I've tried to fly recreationally, I've not had an issue getting approval, but maybe I've not been in any more restrictive areas.
You're mostly right. I think there are some areas that if you want to fly higher than the allotted amount, a commercial pilot can apply and normally gets waived to fly higher. What the system that we're talking about here is that if you're a new pilot, whether you're flying recreationally or commercially, then you have to use the FAA's LANC system. Now, I know what you're thinking. It is absolutely the worst acronym for an instant airspace authorization.
Bonus points if you can actually say what it stands for.
Low altitude and notification capability.
You do not get to play the game.
But what this means is it's instant approvals visa of many different applications. And if you do have a commercial Part 107 license, you can even get certain what are called wide area authorizations to fly, like what we have here at DroneU HQ. Rob, what are your favorite apps to be able to get those authorizations?
There are two in particular that I love a lot, and I would say they're 50-50. I could use either one of them. The first is Airspace Link, very intuitive, easy to use, nice system. You go in there and plan a mission, and it kind of guides you from there. And the other is UA Sidekick. I like that one as well. Both offer instant approvals through the LAN system. They're going to show you all the information you need, such as altitude limits, no-fly zones. I will say Airspace Link has more information as to what kind of areas for example, are there schools? Are there other areas that you need to be aware of? I think Airspace Link has a really nice database of what those kinds of areas look like.
I also think apps like Airspace Link also provide much more understanding of everything going on in the airspace as they link with multiple advanced operations to see things like drone delivery and potential, things that could get in the way of your fun flight.
Absolutely. And Airspace Link is progressing in terms of their capability and what they offer to even a recreational pilot seemingly every day.
So let me ask you this, Rob. If you're flying recreationally, just how high can you fly?
Well, you can fly up to the legal limit of 400 AGL.
That's always my favorite question that I get when flying drones. How far away and how high can you fly? It's like, well, do you want the legal answer or the practical answer?
We want the legal answer.
That's right. Now, here's another interesting bifurcation between commercial and recreational pilots. If you're commercial, you can actually fly 400 feet above the highest object as long as you're within a 400-foot radius. So let's say I'm in downtown Denver and I'm flying the Wells Fargo building. Well, now I can go 400 feet above the highest point of that building as long as I'm within a 400-foot radius. But as a recreational pilot, you can't do it.
Interesting to know. I do have another question. I have heard other people talk about how you must follow terrain changes. Is that a thing that pilots need to worry about, either recreationally or commercially?
You know, this argument came up with the FAA NTSB meeting that we had in 2019, and the NTSB pretty much argued that they do believe that you're supposed to be able to do that, but without a solid means of being able to measure the actual ground right below you, that it was next to impossible to actually legally comply with that rule.
So for example, if you take off on a hill, but then it goes down from there, that would suggest if you're to follow terrain changes, your drone better go down to match the terrain, and it does not seem like that's a requirement.
So that's where things get hairy and gray.
Ooh, we're not doing hairy and gray on this show.
No. I mean, again, if your drone has an ability to measure straight down and you can give you a live feed of what that altitude is, then you absolutely have to comply. But most drones don't have the capability of doing that, as optical flow sensors typically don't work once you're more than 30, it depends on the drone, sometimes 30 feet, sometimes 30 meters above the ground. Those sensors don't work anymore. It's my understanding that you are not required to, if you don't have a means of measuring that altitude, that you don't have to comply with that rule. But if you do have a means like a downward facing laser rangefinder, then you do have to comply with that. Now, when it comes to mapping, this is where terrain awareness comes into play. If you're not familiar with terrain awareness and how that works on your drone, then just check out our mapping classes. Also, we've got really cool videos on YouTube, like what is the best mapping software, that we'll link to below, so that if you're wondering what we're talking about, because you want to turn your toy into a tool and you want to do it the right way and learn from people who have done it for over a decade, then guess what? We can help you do that. But this does make me beg the question, Rob, of like, when we talk about these differences between recreational and commercial flights, is it really worth it to take the trust test, and just what is it?
Well, I do think it's worth it, and this is an area where we might disagree, as if that ever happens.
Uh-oh.
It is a course that recreational pilots are required to take, and by required, I mean it's something the FAA requires. The thing about it is that it probably takes 30 minutes. There's multiple places that you can go to take it. And I think it's worth your time in addition to ultimately getting your Part 107.
So this is where we do disagree indeed, just like why I'm not bald. But that being said, that's an issue for another time. I think you should skip the trust test because here's why. If you love taking flight, then chances are you're going to go on drone adventures. If you love going on vacations and you love capturing panos, videos, whatever, what happens if someone ultimately says, hey, can I buy that picture from you? Well, if you don't have your Part 107, the answer is no. But if you do have your Part 107, the answer is yes. And now your vacation is a write-off. So for me, it's kind of logical deduction, but for you, it's whatever you want it to be.
Well, I would actually disagree with that term, logical deduction. To me, it seems very logical. Take the trust. Otherwise, you don't fly at all, technically, according to the FAA, until you have your Part 107 if you're gonna skip the trust test. Because you're supposed to have at least that to fly even recreationally.
I think it's important to know the rules no matter what. For me, it's just like, if I'm going to go in, I want to go all in. Which brings me up to our next question. When it comes to registering your drone, a lot of people get this confused. Recreationally, commercially. Rob, what are the rules for registering our drone?
My understanding, first of all, is that if you are a commercial pilot, which I know you said to answer recreationally, I'm just going to do it all in one fell swoop. You need to register your drone if you're going to be flying under Part 107, regardless. If you are a recreational pilot only, then you do not need to register any drones that are less than 250 grams / 0.55 pounds. Once you get over that, and we're not even going to talk about drones that weigh more than 55 pounds, under that, you do need to register your drone as a recreational pilot.
FAA dronezone.faa.gov is exactly where you can register that drone. It is $5 to register the drone, and it's good for 3 years. Now, Rob, I know a lot of people have said, oh, if my drone is not 250 grams, I don't have to register it. But you're saying under Part 107, you got to register it regardless.
If you're flying as a Part 107 pilot, then yes, you are supposed to register it regardless. That is my understanding. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Now, the last part of that registration is don't forget to make a cute little sticker like this one that you can see here to actually mark the aircraft. Old boomers used to think they were smart by putting it in the battery tray to hide it, but that only made you look like a criminal if DHS showed up.
Well, another really important point on this is that if you are a recreational pilot, you only need one registration number that covers all of the drones that you own. If you're a commercial pilot, every single drone has to have its own registration number.
Very cool.
Important point.
That is important. I gotta say, my Sharpie skills aren't worth it, so I'll leave it to the label maker. Now, that being said, when it comes to registering our drone, if you remember, the FAA got really upset at us. I'm talking about you, Kevin. And he's about remote ID and how you're supposed to notate that in your registration. Now, I learned this the hard way, that if your drone has remote ID built into it, well, then you're supposed to notate that on your registration regardless, at least if it's for Part 107 or the commercial rules. But what are these remote ID requirements, and do a lot of newer drones have to worry about this issue?
Most newer drones do not. I think anything, particularly with DJI Mavic 2s, Phantoms, even the V2, the Phantom 4 Pro V2 and below, those are not going to have built-in remote ID. So you're going to need to add a transponder to those drones, but most drones that people are flying nowadays have it built in.
That's awesome. So when you do register your drone, you'll have to notate whether it is remote ID, standard remote ID compliant. And if it's one of those newer drones, then you just say yes. Yep, that's all you do is just click yes.
Now, one tidbit that I think we should clarify, again, I'd like you to correct me if I'm not quite right, but as you're registering your drone, if you're using an older drone that you need to use a module for, an add-on module, which you can get, by the way, on Amazon for relatively inexpensive, my understanding is that you need to add a serial number for that module when you're registering the drone.
I believe that you are correct regarding that, because you're going to have a serial number regarding the drone and then a serial number regarding the module, because they're broadcasting different information. So I believe you are correct on that. And I just have to say, it's amazing, these older drones, how fast the drone tags have been commoditized on Amazon. Like cheap Chinese tags came out within 6 months. Holy cow.
Absolutely. I think when this first became a thing and people were adding modules because they wanted to be compliant, I think they were spending a few $100s on each one. At least a couple hundred, if I remember right.
I think you're absolutely correct.
Now you can get them for $20-$30, and I'm sure they're fine.
Now, let's talk about the very last rule for recreational pilots. It's a much more serious rule for commercial pilots. But they say if you're a recreational pilot, don't operate dangerously. What does that even mean?
Well, I think in particular it means be very, very careful where you're flying. So stay away from first responder activities, whether it's a fire, whether it's a hostage situation, anywhere where law enforcement or fire departments are working. You must stay away from large gatherings. I think it's 30,000 or more, but staying away even less than that is probably better. So stadiums, any kind of sporting event. Obviously, Washington, D.C. I say obviously because I think most people know this by now, that Washington, D.C. is essentially an entire no-fly zone for all intents and purposes.
A lot of people don't know about the freeze. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. You cannot fly in national parks.
But you can take off from outside and fly in like we so said back in 2015. We've had NPS buy photos from us. We've trained the NPS team. This is a good bifurcation, though, because recently we had a drone use student who went to a national park, and the supervising director gave him permission to fly because he had his Part 107. This is the first time I've heard of this.
Interesting.
I don't know if this is going to become a new thing. There was just a Supreme Court case eliminating photography and videography permits for national parks. It's a First Amendment violation. That's how they controlled drones. Now that doesn't exist. So we're in a new arena here.
Yeah.
But that being said, Rob, when you're talking about stadiums, when you're talking about law enforcement and fire activities, I think it's important for all of you rec pilots out there to understand that you shouldn't be flying over like groups of people. That's essentially what we're getting at.
Yeah.
And when it comes to law enforcement and fire, oftentimes they have drones up too. And by you flying and just seeing what's going on can sometimes actually really inhibit someone from flying a thermal drone to save someone's life. If there's a hot spot on a roof or a brush fire, you could cause more harm than good. Look, we know your heart's in the right place, but when it just comes to those events, steer clear and stay grounded.
Absolutely. And of course, when we talk about flying dangerously, do not ever fly under the influence of anything, whether it be alcohol, whether it be marijuana, or anything that would impact your ability to be completely 100% coherent. I would say even just flying kind of willy-nilly around people.
In fact, once you take your Part 107, you'll realize that the FAA says you're not supposed to fly if you took Benadryl because it impacts your cognitive capability. So when they say do not fly under the influence of drugs or alcohol, if there is an enforcement action, they are also going to ask you if you took any OTC medications and if you have any prescription drugs as well. Now, the only time we've actually seen this enforced was recently, Rob, as a man flew his Mini 4 Pro over a Cars and Coffee, and he did it drunk, and they fined him $3,000. So it's cheaper than a DUI, but still is going to cost you.
Yeah. Cheaper for now, but if you hit somebody, it might not be.
Yeah, good point. So when it comes to flying, there's two ways to fly, recreationally and commercially. To summarize, recreational flights, they are strictly for recreational purposes, no monetized YouTube channels. You can fly under community-based rules or community-based organizations. That link is listed below. You're going to have to maintain visual line of sight, and if you're flying FPV, make sure you have a VO. Always yield to manned aircraft, and if you're flying in controlled airspace, normally near airports, helipads, etc., then you will need an instant airspace authorization, otherwise known as LANC, which you can get via the airspace.
I prefer Lance.
Always make sure if you're flying recreationally that you're below 400 feet AGL or above ground level. If you are flying recreationally, then you are required to take the trust test. you will have to register your drone, whether it's recreational or commercial. You will need remote ID, which most new drones have, Mini 3 Pro, Mini 4 Pro, DJI Air 3, Air 3S, Air 4, Avata 2, they all have remote ID compliance. And then the last rule is don't operate dangerously. And to say it one more time, if you realize how many things you have to do to even fly recreationally, this is why I say if you're gonna invest the time, just go all in, get your federal certificate as Part 107. We offer that course, but if you wanna go further than that, you wanna actually gain confidence in flight, learn from experienced drone pilots who've been flying over a decade doing drone jobs in dirty conditions, different environments, and we have faced the hard stuff. We can actually give you systematic operational standards so that way you never crash. Or at least you never crash if you're not pushing the envelope super hard. If you're ready to fly lower, closer, and smoother than all your friends, you're ready to do so with confidence, and you want to fly with confidence, then check out our Safe Drone Operations course or any of our other courses to help you monetize your toy and turn it into a tool. Whether that's mapping, inspections, 3D modeling, subject tracking for car commercials, boat commercials, all that fun stuff like surfing, or if you want to do even some basic videography, or you want panos to put in the house for the rest of your life for memories that you'll never forget, we have classes on all of that because we've been doing this longer than anyone else. And we're also the only ones who actually do it from experience. That being said, if you're considering your Part 107, it's a 60 question test versus the 10 question test on trust. You'll still have to register your drone regardless, but this way you will have opportunities to fly in places that some hobbyists and recreational pilots simply won't be able to fly. So it's up to you. Do you just move on from the trust test because you're a serious pilot, ready to have fun, ready to have drone adventures, and ready to have write-offs? Well, then maybe it's time to get your Part 107, and maybe it's time to check out Drone U. So when it comes to the rules of flying your drone in 2026, we're about to see a huge change. New rules are coming, new certificates are coming. So what's coming in 2026, Rob, and why does it matter so much to already have your Part 107?
Well, I'm starting to see your vision here as to why you were so adamant in the early part of this video about getting a Part 107. You're going to have that to be able to get your Part 108, which is going to open a lot of doors for those who are willing to go through the trouble of getting it.
Yes, this is like if you're a pilot and you're finally getting your IFR certification, except this time it's called an AFR certification, or Automated Flight Rules.
So let's talk a little bit about what the Part 108 is going to include. We know that BVLOS is a big part of it. What else is there?
Well, there's also 10 different ways to say BVLOS, as I've learned in this industry.
There are.
BVLOS, BVLOS, BVLOS,
or just BVLOS, which I kind of like for some reason.
Is this going to turn into a dance? I don't know. Anyway.
BVLOS.
Beyond visual line of sight operations simply mean that you're going to be able to fly your drone, well, beyond visual line of sight. And there's a couple of add-ons to that to make it even more prominent, which means remote operations. Let's say that you work at an oil company and you've got drone docks all over Midland, Texas. But instead of driving 2 hours to do a 15-minute mission, you're sitting in your office with a beautiful cup of coffee, probably roasted at Lima, and you are realizing it's time to take flight in a few different sites. So you pull up your computer, you open up your Skydio or Sunflower Labs or whatever dock that you're flying, and you fly beyond visual line of sight because you're behind a computer and, well, it's in the middle of Midland, Texas. These beyond visual line of sight operations literally are the next level of drone operations in the world. Think drone delivery. Think security. You know, we used to have security desks. We used to have gates that you would drive through. We used to have security cameras. Well, now your security camera can move and chase the car, read its license plate, and report it back to the police. We're talking about a whole new wave of technology actually taking flight in the skies. Think about also if you want that Sunbum shampoo and you ran out this morning, but you need it tonight. Well, drone delivery will get it to you as long as you're within 5 miles of a Walmart. And Walmart doesn't sell it, so Target, it's time to up your game. That being said, beyond visual line of sight operations are going to be everything from drone delivery to remote operations to security to even replacing the golf cart girl at the golf course.
That's tragic.
I think that's going to take a while, Bob.
There will be a revolt
yes,
of all the old white guys on the golf course.
And then it's going to evolve into like some female robot flying lands and she's like, here's your food.
Oh, geez.
But when it comes to beyond visual line of sight, as Rob notated, you will need a Part 107 certificate to be able to fly these beyond visual line of sight operations. This could also be simple things like utility inspections from a long ways away. There's a lot of terrain in the United States that is not really drivable. And if you can get within a few miles of that area, then you can fly it. I know that some illegal operations might already be doing this, but to actually scale these operations to provide a lot of value for utilities, pipelines, communications lines, fiber, all of that, these operations are going to incredibly scale up very fast. And you can either be a part of the change or you can be left behind.
100%. I think if you're somebody who's looking to the future of the drone industry and excited to be a part of it, this is an area you really need to be preparing for now.
It really does. So what does Part 108 feature? We're going to keep this quick, but essentially all these new drones are going to have a new mechanism to communicate with other aircraft. This has been one of the biggest complaints of drone pilots for remote ID is that, well, manned aviation can't even see remote ID. So what's the point? Well, now there's going to be a whole new system, and this is why companies like Airspace Link are taking flight so rapidly, as they are now combining all these different data sets, ADS-B, TCAS, etc., into one centralized platform to see what's really going on in the sky.
It's going to be amazing. It really is.
Now, there are also going to be some new minimum operational standards for drone performances. I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole on this because this is where I see our systems highly benefit us versus everyone else in training. There's also going to be more integrations of these drones as AFR. AFR is automated flight rules, and they're going to communicate with manned aircraft in controlled airspace to essentially create what we've been talking about since 2016, the unmanned or the Universal Traffic Management Framework.
UTM, you will be hearing that term a lot more in 2026.
And the big thing with that is going to be deconfliction protocols to make sure that flights are more formal, more structured. And I think this is where Back to the Future was wrong, because where we're going, there will be roads, you just can't see them.
Wednesday, October 21st, 2015.
Roads? Where we're going, we don't need roads.
Here we go, Jetsons.
Yeah, seriously. Yeah, you can buy a Jetson 1. That's what I want for my birthday, Rob. Make it happen. All right. Certification and training requirements. Pretty much, you'll need a specialized BVLOS rating. Some have speculated that this will be a Part 108 certification. Rumors out of the FAA showcase, too, that there will be 2 different levels of certification. One over 55 pounds and one below 55 pounds. That way, if you need to save lives out of a raging river like what happened in Texas, you can do so with a big T100 DJI drone if you're still allowed to buy them. Those heavy lift operations will have an additional operational certification. So airspace is going to change as there will be altitude caps on these more complex beyond visual line of sight operations. There will be prohibitions over flying over certain areas with special approvals and mitigations, and there will also be geographic restrictions around sensitive sites. You might not think that's important unless you live in Atlanta, Georgia, and you've been to that rock that's north of the city that causes crazy, insane GPS error, and you'll realize that there certainly are certain places that you don't want to fly BVLOS. So to summarize the rules in 2026, they'll be mostly the same except 2 new certifications. So I asked the question again, are you sure you want to take the trust test or just go to Part 107, where then you can take flight into Part 108? Look, if you're like me and you love to fly, then you're going to want to stay ahead of the curve. It is time to take flight seriously or more seriously and realize that flying recreationally, albeit fun, has its limitations. Also a limitation fun, if you ask me. But that being said, Rob, thank you for joining me today and understanding the Part 107 rules, recreational rules, and Part 108.
It is my pleasure. I think it's an exciting time to be a part of the industry. It is maturing, and the Part 108 certifications and everything that comes along with that is going to be a big jump in that maturity process.
100%. Couldn't agree more.
Keep an eye out for more information coming from Drone U.
If you're ready to elevate your drone adventures, if you're ready to create profit centers and you want to turn that passion into profit, then you've got to become a Drone U member or sign up for one of our classes in person or online. You won't be disappointed because we can lower your learning curve better than anyone else. Why? Because we actually fly. On that bombshell, we'll see you in the Drone U community.